Tales from Childhood, written by Roald Dahl. Part 4. Those summer holidays, those magic words, the mere mention of them used to send shivers of joy rippling over my skin. All summer holidays, from when I was 4 years old to when I was 17, that is between 1920 to 1932, were totally idyllic. This, I am certain, was because we always went to the same idyllic place, and that place was Norway. Except for my half sister and my half brother, the rest of us were all pure Norwegian by blood. We all spoke Norwegian, and all our relations lived over there. So, in a way, going to Norway every summer was like going home. Even the journey was an event. Do not forget that there were no commercial aeroplanes in those times, so it took us 4 whole days to complete the trip out and another 4 days to get home again. We were always an enormous party. There were my three sisters and my half sister and my half brother and me, that is 6, and my mother, that is 7, and nanny, that is 8, and in addition to these, there were never less than two others who were some sort of anonymous friends of the half sister, that is total 10 altogether. Looking back on it now, I don't know how my mother did it. There were all those train bookings and boat bookings and hotel bookings to made in advance by letter. She had to make sure that we had enough shorts and shirts and sweaters and gym shoes and bathing costumes. You couldn't even buy a shoelace on the island we were going to, and the packing must have been a nightmare. 6 huge trunks were carefully packed, as well as countless suitcases, and when the great departure day arrived, the 10 of us, together with our mountains of luggage, would set out on the first and easiest step of journey, that is the train to London. When we arrived in London, we tumbled into three taxis and went clattering across the great city to King's Cross, where we got onto the train for Newcastle, 200 miles to north. The trip to Newcastle took about 5 hours, and when we arrived there, we needed three more taxis to take us from the station to the docks where our boat would be waiting. The next stop after that would be Oslo, the capital of Norway. When I was young, the capital of Norway was not called Oslo, it was called Christiana. But somewhere along the line, the Norwegians decided to do away with that pretty name and called it Oslo instead. As children, we always knew it as Christiana, but if I call it that here, we shall only get confused. So I had better stick to Oslo all the way through. The sea journey from Newcastle to Oslo took 2 days and a night, and if it was rough, as it often was, all of us got seasick except our dauntless mother. We used to lie in deck chairs on the promenade deck within easy reach of the rails, embalmed in rugs, our faces slate grey and our stomachs churning, refusing the hot soup, the ship's biscuits the kindly steward kept offering us. And as for poor Nanny, she began to feel sick the moment she set foot on deck. I hate these things, she used to say. I am sure we will never get there. Which lifeboat do we go to when it starts sink? Then she would retire to her cabin where she stayed groaning and trembling until the ship was firmly tied up at the quayside in Oslo harbor the next day. We always stopped off for one night in Oslo so that we could have a grand annual family reunion with my maternal grandfather and maternal grandmother and with her two maiden sisters, that is, our aunts, who lived in the same house. When we got off the boat, we all went in a cavalcade of taxis straight to the Grand Hotel where we would sleep one night to drop off our luggage. Then, keeping the same taxis, we drove onto the grandparents' house where an emotional welcome awaited us. All of us were embraced and kissed many times, and tears flowed down wrinkled old cheeks. And suddenly, the quiet, gloomy house came alive with many children's voices. Ever since I first saw her, my grandmother was terrifically old. She was a white haired, wrinkly faced old bird who seemed always to be sitting in her rocking chair, rocking away and smiling benignly at this vast influx of grandchildren who barged in from miles away to take over her house for a few hours every year. Grandfather was the quiet one. He was a small, dignified scholar with a white beard, and as far as I could gather, he was an astrologer, a meteorologist, and a speaker of ancient Greek. Like grandmother, he sat most of the time quietly in a chair, saying very little and totally overwhelmed, I imagine, by the raucous rabble who were destroying his neat and polished home. The two things I remember most about grandfather were that he wore black boots and that he smoked an extraordinary pipe. The bowl of his pipe was made of miscram clay and It had a flexible stem about 3 feet long so that the bowl rested on his lap. All the grown ups, including Nanny, and all the children, even when the youngest was only a year, sat down around the big oval dining room table on the afternoon of our arrival for the great annual celebration feast with the grandparents, and the food we received never varied. This was a Norwegian household, and for the Norwegians, the best food in the world is fish. And when they say fish, they don't mean the sort of things you and I get from the fishmonger. They mean fresh fish, fish that has been caught no more than 24 hours before and has never been frozen or chilled on a block of ice. I agree with them that the proper way to prepare fish like this is to poach it, and that is what they do with the finest specimens. And Norwegians, by the way, always eat the skin of the boiled fish, which they say has the best taste of all. So, naturally, this great celebration feast started with fish. A massive fish, a flounder as big as tea tray and as thick as your arm, was brought to the table. It had nearly black skin on top, which was covered with brilliant orange spots, and it had, of course, been perfectly poached. Large white hunks of this fish were carved out and put on to our plates. And with it, we had hollandaise sauce and boiled new potatoes. Nothing else. And by gosh, it was delicious. As soon as the remains of the fish had been cleared away, a tremendous craggy mountain of homemade ice cream would be carried in. Apart from being the creamiest ice cream in the world, the flavor was unforgettable. There were thousands of little chips of crisp burnt toffee mixed into the Norwegian call it kokram, and as a result, it didn't simply melt in your mouth like ordinary ice cream. You chewed it and it went crunch, and the taste was something you dreamed about for days afterwards. This great feast would be interrupted by small speeches of welcome from my grandfather and interspersed with greetings like slal, slal, slal. The next morning, everyone got up early and eager to continue the journey. There was another full day's traveling to be done before we reached our final destination, most of it by boat. So, after a rapid breakfast, our, our cavalcade left the Grand Hotel in three more taxis and headed for Oslo docks. There we went on board a small coastal steamer, and Nanny was heard to say, I am sure it leaks. We shall all be food for the fishes before the day is out. Then she would disappear below for the rest of the trip. We loved this part of the journey. The splendid little vessel with its single tall funnel would move out into the calm waters of the Jord and proceed at a leisurely pace along the coast, stopping every hour or so at a small wooden jetty where a group of villagers and summer people would be waiting to welcome friends or to collect parcels and mail. Unless you have sailed down the Oslo Jord like this yourself on a tranquil summer's day, you cannot imagine what it is like. It is impossible to describe the sensation of absolute peace and beauty that surrounds you. The boat weaves in and out between countless tiny islands, some with small, brightly painted wooden houses on them, but many with not a house or a tree on the bare rocks. These granite rocks are so smooth that you can lie on, sun yourself on them in your bathing costume. There are no sandy beaches on the Jord. The rocks go straight down to the water's edge and the water is immediately deep. As a result, Norwegian children all learn to swim when they are very young because if you can't swim, it is difficult to find a place to bathe. Sometimes, when our little vessel slipped between two small islands, the channel was so narrow we could almost touch the rocks on either side. We would pass rowboats and canoes with flaxen haired children in them, their skins browned by the sun, and we would wave to them and watch their tiny boats rocking violently in the swell that our larger ship left behind. Late in the afternoon, we would come finally to the end of the journey, the island of Jom. This was where our mother always took us. Heaven knows how she found it, but to us it was the greatest place on earth. About 200 yards from the jetty, along a narrow dusty road, stood a simple wooden hotel painted white. It was run by an elderly couple whose faces I still remember vividly, and every year they welcomed us like old friends. Everything about the hotel was extremely primitive except dining room. The walls, the ceiling and the floor of our bedrooms were made of plain unvarnished pine planks. There was a wash basin and a jug of cold water in each of them. Breakfast was the best meal of the day in our hotel, and it was all laid out on a huge table in the middle of the dining room from which you helped yourself. There were maybe 50 different dishes to choose from on the table. There were large jugs of milk, which all Norwegian children drink at every meal. There were plates of cold beef, veal, ham, and pork. There was cold boiled mackerel submerged in aspic. There were spiced and pickled herring fillets, sardines, smoked eel, and cod roe. There was a large bowl piled high with hot boiled eggs. There were cold omelets with chopped ham in them, and cold chicken and hot coffee for the grown ups, and hot crisp rolls baked in hotel kitchen, which we eat with butter and cranberry jam. There were stewed apricots and five or six different cheeses, including, of course, the ever present Jetstot, that tall, brown, rather sweet Norwegian goat's cheese, which you find on just about every table in the land. After breakfast, we collected our bathing things, and the whole party, all 10 of us, would pile into our boat. Everyone has some sort of a boat in Norway. Nobody sits around in front of the hotel, nor does anyone sit on the beach because there are not any beaches to sit in. In the early days, we had only a rowboat what a very fine one it was. It carried all of us easily with places for two rowers. My mother took one part of our oars, and my fairly half brother took the other, and off we would go. My mother and half brother were expert rowers. They kept in perfect time, and the oar went click, 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 click. And the rovers never paused once during the long 40 minutes journey. The rest of us sat in the boat, trailing our fingers in the clear water and looking for jellyfish. We skimmed across the sound and went whizzing through narrow channels with rocky islands on either side, heading as always for a very secret tiny patch of sand on a distant island that only we knew about. In the early days, we needed a place like this where we could paddle and play about because my youngest sister was only one, the next sister was three, and I was four. The rocks and the deep water were no good to us. Every day, for several summers, the tiny secret sand patch on the tiny secret island was our regular destination. We would stay there for 3 or 4 hours, messing about in the water and in the rock pools and getting extraordinarily sunburned.